Hi, friend. Welcome to Live at Your Edge. I'm Ashley, and I have been immersed in a process of self-evolution and healing for the last about 8 years. And I love getting to share my learnings, my experiences, my perspectives on here with you. And so thank you so much for hanging out with me. Today, I want to share with you some of the biggest mistakes that I have made while healing. I think it can be so valuable to reflect on our mistakes because we do learn from them so well. And my hope is that by sharing some of these, they will sort of shine a light on something that you're going through or bring an insight to you about your own experience. The first one that I want to share is believing that one day I would be healed and that my life would be easy most of the time. Now, this one is definitely a trap that I fell into. It's sort of that rosy glasses kind of thinking, imagining that just beyond this next phase, right, of healing, my life would get easy, right? And I don't know, I think a lot of people on a self-growth journey might fall into this trap. I certainly did. I really had a vision of my life being so smooth and intuitive and ease-filled all the time. I think one of the reasons that this was so hard for me and why I fell into this thinking was because my reality before I started healing and in the early years of healing was extremely painful. My internal experience was filled with a lot of pain, a lot of darkness and internal suffering. I just found my life very hard to live in, and I desperately wanted things to be easier. And so it was very easy for me to sort of put this image of this perfect life ahead of me as if like that's what I was going to be getting to. At the same time, I will say my life is a lot easier than it was. A lot of my triggers and the trauma that was underneath the surface for me has actually left or shifted or transmuted in some way. And so life feels brighter. My state of being is calmer and more regulated, and I'm overall much more joyful and peaceful internally. But at the same time, I still have significant challenges, right? Sometimes I still struggle with making decisions and choices without getting totally stuck in my head, going around between what's my intuition and what's my mind saying. I still sometimes get into very anxious states. Sometimes I still have triggers, right? And sometimes I sink into some more negative thinking. I still have health issues crop up sometimes. So like it's usually these things don't last as long as they used to. Like often things will resolve themselves more quickly, but I still have them, right? Like, and honestly, thank God life isn't perfect after doing a lot of healing, right? Because the truth is that our struggles, our suffering in life is the crucible for our continued growth and expansion. I will say that one of the reasons this happened for me is because a lot of the spiritual and self-growth teachers that I followed tended to give an impression that life would become extremely easy. And so I don't believe that's because any of them were intentionally trying to manipulate the people that were following them. Like, I don't think any of that stuff was true for these people, but I do think that they were unintentionally giving a message that was a bit misleading. A lot of times teachers would say things like, oh, after you've mastered this piece, your life will get so easy, or you will not believe how ease-filled your life will become once you do blah. And like, again, I don't think that's wrong exactly, but when you get messages like that a lot, it's easy to fall into the trap of believing life is going to be perfect after you've done enough healing. I really believed that my problems, my suffering, all of my suffering and struggles were caused by my trauma, by my triggers, by my wounds, right? So that's the first one. Number 2 was believing that I had to keep track of every single thing that I was learning, every epiphany, every realization, right? Everything that I'd learned so that I wouldn't forget. And I used to write everything down. I was afraid that I would forget things that I was learning because you are learning so much about yourself in the course of any kind of self-exploration, inner healing or a growth path, right? And it is frustrating sometimes when we forget something that we've learned and then we have to either like refigure it out or remember it. But what I didn't necessarily fully understand in the earlier years of my own journey was that when something truly heals, the change happens in our body, in our brains. And so the change is still lasting. It's nice to remember things, but the truth is that we don't actually need to. Once the change has started the rewiring in our system, we don't necessarily have to have conscious, lasting awareness and memory of it. The change will get kicked off and like initiated, and then will continue to ripple out into our bodies, into our lives, into our minds and spirits. We don't actually have to cling on to everything we've learned. It does integrate. And sometimes even if you can't consciously recall it, it is still in our systems. We don't actually have to remember everything that we've learned or healed. What's really changed it for me is that after having enough years of accumulated healing and growth, it's become easier and easier for me to actually see that those changes do integrate and become lasting. And even though I have forgotten an enormous amount of the things that I've learned, at least in my short-term working memory, the changes do last. The progress isn't erased just because my memory of it is. Okay, so number 3 is fearing that some of the things that have been inside of me were too much for me to handle. This was definitely something that was at its worst earlier on in my journey. I used to feel really terrified to go into certain spaces within myself, even though I was committed to doing it because I really, really believed that it was what I needed to do. I was petrified of what dark stuff was deep in there, because I guess I can only speak for myself, but I have had to work through a lot of darkness that was deep inside my being. What has felt like an enormous quantity of it. And there's stuff inside the human psyche that can feel really scary, completely unknown, something that we've hidden and buried for many, many, many years, things that we've intentionally buried and not looked at because they did feel too scary. And so when you start like letting those things rise up, you start looking inside the self, letting the dark things come out. I mean, it felt literally terrifying to me. But what I have learned after doing many years of shadow work now for myself is that there actually is nothing inside that is so awful that we can't handle it. So one of my earlier teachers, who was a huge impact in my life and who I trained with for years in in-person retreats and online, used to say that, our bodies will not let us go into anything deeper than we're ready to go into. Like, our bodies are self-protective in that way. So if you go into something and you feel like, oh my God, this is going to be too much for me to handle, the truth is that our systems will only let us go into the layer that we're ready for. It's part of why things heal in layers. And I have personally found that she was right. I mean, I did find that to be reassuring of her to say at the time, and it really helped me to have some of the courage to go into it, was trying to trust that it was going to be okay to go into some of this stuff. But now, after 8 years of doing this work, I have really come to trust that this is true and believe that the body is very wise that way and knows what it's capable of doing and what it's ready for, even if you don't, right? Even if your conscious mind doesn't know that. Our systems, we can trust them. Number 4 is worrying that maybe I wasn't capable of growing and healing enough to actually feel happy and content in my life. I really used to have a fear that maybe I would stay stuck and never be able to change enough that I could actually experience joy and happiness in my life. So I think that for me, this came about because my healing path felt so arduous. and so long and so slow a lot of the time. Even after years and years of working on myself, I still felt so often trapped in these dark states, these dark spaces a lot. I think the reason was because I was really still very much going through a dark night of the soul for many of those years, which is really a dark night of the ego, but oftentimes the word we use for it is dark night of the soul. It just, for me, it lasted years and years. And I really don't actually think that's uncommon. I think some of us go through multiple dark nights, right? And I think sometimes some of us go through these really, really, really long ones. And when you're in a dark tunnel like that, it can just be so hard to have faith and hope. In a way, this one's not as much as a mistake as like a misimpression that I had. But I think it's really important to name it because I think that a lot of people go through this. Anyone who's gone through an extended dark night of the ego, I think, knows that there are moments when you lose hope, when you really believe that maybe you'll be stuck in this kind of state, this kind of feeling forever. And in those moments, often for me, it was this feeling of like, well, other people can heal, but maybe I can't. Maybe I'm not strong enough. Maybe I'm not capable enough. Maybe I'm not good enough. You know, like it's kind of, sometimes it's that good enough stuff, right? Those deep, not good enough wounds that will come up in those dark moments, right? And so that's the kind of thing that our mind will do sometimes when we feel really, really overwhelmed. It's not true. It's never true, right? It's never true. But it is easy for the mind to get pulled into those dark spaces when that's the space that we're occupying, right? And so for me, I guess this one is one that sort of gradually healed and changed as I went into and worked through more and more and more of the darkness. That's, for me, that's what I needed to do. I just had to keep sitting in all the dark emotion and dark states that would come and really feel for what was in there and bring as much love and compassion that I was physically capable of bringing to those spaces, and do a lot of physical somatic processing, a lot of deep, like, emotional immersing, right, in the ocean of experience, just continuing to do that process over and over and over and over again for as long as it's taken. And it's not to say that it's all gone, but I don't currently think of myself as being in a dark night of the ego right at this moment. I think for me, that chapter has passed. That's not to say there won't be more of them, right? These things come and go. But I think now that I'm no longer inside of that moment, it's pretty clear to me that those thoughts that were coming were part of the darkness. They were not part of me, right? Okay, so number 5 is believing that being on a healing and growth path is a better life way than other life ways. This is such a hard one, right? I think that most of us human beings would like to think the way that we found to live is the best way to live. And, you know, once I personally started seeing how powerful and transformative this work was, I felt like it was important for everyone to do it, right? This one in particular really took a certain body of knowledge landing for me, I think, for me to actually really be able to become more aware of kind of the superciliousness of this way of thinking and its untruth. I'll share my own personal experience with this, but at some point I learned about, and now deeply, deeply believe, that human beings are incarnating here on earth over and over and over and over again, right? And living many lifetimes here before completing our soul's evolutionary path here on earth. And that as a result, each of us are at a different phase of our soul's evolution, our soul's path. And so what that essentially means, in my view, and I think the view of a lot of people who do sort of have that perspective, is that all of us are here on earth in this lifetime to do different work. Each life is about learning something different, and it's not possible to say that living in one way is better than living in another way. All lives are different. Just because someone's, 60% through their soul's evolutionary path and someone is 40% of the way through is not to say that someone who's at one point or another is doing something more important or better than what the other person is doing, right? All of us go through all these points in our path, right? And so, it's kind of like talking about people that are different phases of their career, right? Are you better off if you're 64 years old in your career, or are you better off when you're 34 years old? And it's like, well, neither, right? Because there's upsides and downsides to both things, right? You're more experienced when you're 64, but you might have more juice and enthusiasm when you're 34. Like, there's just ups and downs to either place. That's how I sort of see it now. And it's really, for me anyway, it's been really helpful to learn that. I'm sure that, there's other components to that too, right? There's other pieces, I think, of the ego that have to eventually dissolve in order for us to settle into this truth that, like, every single person who's alive is here doing the thing that they're meant to be doing. That we are all here having the experiences that we came here to have. No matter what our little human minds think of someone else's life, or what they're doing, or how they're spending their life, or what choices they make, the higher truth is that we're all here experiencing exactly what we came here for. Because we each have to live many different lives for our soul to continue evolving to a point where our evolutionary process, at least on Earth, is complete. So these are the biggest ones for me. Again, even though mistakes don't feel good to make, they are how we learn. And so I certainly don't regret making any of these mistakes. They were part of my learning process. And so I'm honestly really grateful for them. And my hope is that sharing them with you might illuminate something helpful on your own path. So thank you so much, as always, for tuning in, and I will see you on the next episode.